Casa Spa and Wellness Center here, and soon to be open the Casa Spa and Wellness Center Puerto Rico. It was closed for about 15 years. I opened it about 30 years ago, and I've been spending the last year renovating it, and I'm very excited about its imminent opening. But I can't tell you when it'll be. It might be a month, it might be a year. It's hard to say. Depends on how soon I get my hobbit houses. But I have a lead. I'm getting funding, which I'm happy about. This is Dr. Adiel Oren, and I'm so pleased to have him here again. Whenever he comes, we have a full house, and that's very fun for me and interesting for me. And I don't really have anything to say about him except I think the man is completely brilliant, completely charming, completely handsome, as you can see, and also completely funny. So I think we're all going to have a good time tonight. And thank you so much for being here.
Well, my pleasure. And that's the bell. Saved by the bell, right? Now it's a hard, tough act to follow.
That was your introduction.
Yes, thank you. I just came from a large clinic that was all day right after flying from Florida, and then driving back from Lakewood to give the lecture. And I have to share with you that I had an interesting experience in the last month and a half, which relates to this topic. I had MRSA and Lyme's at the same time, and lived to talk about it. So MRSA is bad enough by itself. Lyme's, MRSA, you know what MRSA is, right?
No.
Methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus. That's what kills a lot of people in the hospitals nowadays. So I developed MRSA.
And by the way, essentially killed my sister-in-law, my Greg, who manages La Casa. His sister, she got MRSA. It's flesh-eating bacteria. It was so bad they had to do skin grafts on her all over her body. And then they had to give her immune suppressive drugs so that the skin grafts were taken. She died of cancer from the immune.
How do you get MRSA?
Oh, let me. Well,
Okay.
we're not going to diverge too far. Let me tell the story and then you'll understand. But thanks for your enthusiasm. It's something that I don't necessarily want people to get too tied down with the concept of fear against a bacterium. The fact is, I had MRSA, and by the time it was diagnosed, I was already done with it. It was already finished. What I didn't know was that I also had Lyme disease at the same time, which explained my extremely strong, powerful inflammation that was extremely uncomfortable and made me see less patients those days and give a few less lectures, but I kept working through it. And it was very uncomfortable. I suffered. I admit it was horrible. But it didn't knock me out. And by the time the infectious disease specialist diagnosed it as MRSA, they said there was nothing further to do because it was done. It was over. So the important point is not to be afraid, but to know that just like all other bacteria that are normally utilized as an excuse to give you antibiotics, like Streptococcus, right? Who doesn't know about antibiotics for strep throat, right? So everybody is afraid of strep throat because it became a very famous excuse to give us antibiotics before we even get the results of the test, the swab. And it turned out that 50% of the population are positive for strep throat. So in 50% of the cases, the bacteria will be justified after the fact. But in the other 50%, it would not. So we'd say, well, we just gave it to you just in case. You see, it's a foolproof approach if you are bent on giving antibiotic for strep throat. But if you know that you have 50% likelihood of having a positive culture, even now as you sit here, then 50% of us are carriers. And if you are a carrier, you don't have to be afraid. And if you happen to have symptoms, but the symptoms are accompanied by a positive swab, then you would assume that the symptoms are related to something that was naturally in your throat anyway. It has nothing to do with those symptoms. It becomes an excuse. The same is true with MRSA to some extent. MRSA is present at a rate of 3% in the normal population on the skin. So 3 out of assuming that you were 100 people, then 3 of you would naturally carry MRSA on your skin as a regular commensal microorganism. It resides on your skin, it doesn't do you any harm, it's just there. Many of them, many more people have it in your nostril. So if you pick your nose, you might actually be taking some MRSA out of your nose, and if you have a sore or a wound, you might be putting it into it. So only when MRSA has the ability to penetrate your circulation or your blood or underneath the skin for long enough time, only then it can start creating a problem. If you are a healthcare worker, then it's 10%, not 3% chance of being a carrier. So that's a lot of people who are natural carriers of this bacterium. It's not something to always be afraid of. But there are situations where MRSA can penetrate. And that's what I had. I went to Wisconsin. I was dealing with my hobbit houses that you mentioned. We're starting to build our community center this autumn in Wisconsin and in the village. It will be the world's first earth-sheltered village, which will also protect it from electromagnetic exposure. And while I was there, I didn't have anybody to inspect me. I inspected myself for ticks, like you should every night. But I didn't notice that one that was right here. A tiny, tiny nymph. You cannot even see them very easily when they are in the front, let alone in the back. And it was feeding on me for 24 hours, during which that was a long time to penetrate through the skin. That would have been enough for the MRSA to penetrate into the skin and create the huge, angry, painful sore that started it all. And I didn't know that it was MRSA. I thought it was a spider bite for a long time. And everybody else thought it was a spider bite. But it was not. It was MRSA. So sometimes if you don't know something, you're not afraid of it. If I knew it were MRSA, I probably would have done something that I would have regretted later. But I didn't know. So that's a good thing. You just go through it, and you suffer, and we sometimes have to suffer. That's a part of nature. And if I don't feel like I'm about to die, which would have obviously sent me to the ER, I didn't feel that. I was still functioning. I was just not feeling good. So I kept going until finally it was diagnosed when there was already a significant improvement. The sore was already healing, and there was nothing further to do except for the symptoms of the Lyme's, which came at the same time. It's the same night. But the Lyme takes a little longer to culture in the body and to have the symptoms, and I didn't know. And the doctors were mixed up because of the two things happening simultaneously. So one of the things that I had was besides severe pain in the joints, that indicated that I was severely inflamed. I couldn't sleep for 3 nights in a row while I was conducting my foraging trip in Wisconsin several weeks later. So I had a group there, and I had to teach them the whole time, and I couldn't sleep all night, every night, for 3 nights because of the pain. And during the day too, the pain was unbearable. And then people suggested that maybe I had Lyme. I said, no, I had MRSA, and it was already much better. Why is it getting worse again? So I went to the urgent care in Wisconsin, where the doctors see Lymes all the time. Now, to me, the main concern was what happens as a result of that inflammation. Because when your body is severely inflamed, something else could happen to make the inflammation more chronic. You don't want to be inflamed for too long and for too strong if your system is unable to handle it because of its history. And you see, everything about your ability to handle inflammation and pain relates to your history. What have you eaten for the last 30 years, 20 years? What type of activities you had? Have you been sterile in your environment? Have you shied away from being exposed to environmental elements, to microbes, to dirt, to earth, to the sun? Have you been living a sterile, fearful life of the outdoors? Have you been always in a polluted environment which triggers inflammation? So you already have a baseline of inflammation that's always there? Have you been continuously exposed to advanced glycosylated end products in your diet and in your blood, which are probably the single most inflammatory molecules in your body right now?
What end products was that?
Advanced glycosylated end products, AGEs. Now, we all have some AGEs in our body, but some of us have a lot more than others, and more importantly, some of you are genetically programmed to make more receptors for those molecules. And the more receptors you have, the more virulent those AGE molecules would be. So that varies from one person to another. But either way, if you avoid AGEs by changing your diet and controlling your blood sugar and avoiding fructose as a syrup or as a juice of any type, and of course, high fructose corn syrup is obvious. If you avoid all these things, then it won't matter whether or not you have too many receptors, because you won't have enough of those molecules to bind those receptors and create a major inflammatory response. So as long as your history is under control, you can handle a lot more of those inflammatory agents without suffering the next event. And what is the next event? After you had a major storm in your body. And that was my concern, because I had 2 storms at the same time. It was like the perfect storm. I was afraid that maybe I won't be able to handle it, because I was also under a lot of stress. My house was burglarized 2 days before the storm came. So I was thinking, wow, maybe it's too much for me. Maybe I won't be able to handle it. And I was concerned because I know how people develop autoimmune disease, which is the topic of today's discussion. Autoimmune disease starts usually with some kind of an antecedent, a predisposition, a situation that has been with you for months and even years as a baseline that you assumed was healthy and normal, but was not. So each one of you thinks, I'm healthy, but you don't know what mild storm is lurking underneath the surface. As long as you don't have the symptoms, or as long as your symptoms are mild enough that you assume they are normal. So to some people, it's normal to poop once a week, because they're used to that. Until they find out that there's another way, like twice a day maybe, they think that this is normal until somebody tells them otherwise. So if you have mild fatigue, if you must go to sleep twice a day for 2 siestas, if that's normal for you, then you would assume that you are okay with that. And you would say that you are healthy. Until you had a precipitory event, something that would make you feel even worse than before. Now you would think something is wrong. But something was wrong before that. And how do we know if something is wrong or not on a baseline level if there's nobody to compare it with? You can only compare your own health to yourself. Because you had your own mother, and you were in her uterus while she was doing different things from other mothers. How would you know what's your baseline? Is it healthy or is it not healthy? So be careful when you say with great bravado, I'm a healthy person. You don't know for sure, because you have nothing to compare it with. And if you have a baseline that's already predisposed, meaning you have antecedents, which could be excessive receptors to a certain product, like the AGE. Or it could be that you had a chronic exposure to pollutants in the environment. And we all do. But we also have different ability to handle those pollutants. Different genome spells different tolerability. And let's say that your immune system, as a baseline, is continuously reacting to something that you're eating on a regular basis. That could also be an issue, because it's continuously heightened in its response. It's stimulated, hypervigilant, and you're not even aware of it because it's your baseline. But now all it takes is a precipitory event or a trigger. A precipitory event will be a single event after which there is a difference in your health. Suddenly you are suffering from something that soon enough will receive a diagnosis, like an autoimmune disease. That precipitory event could be a single time event and stop. It could be a major stress in your life. And you all know people who had major events that precipitated an inflammatory response, which ultimately was categorized as a specific disease with a name. So think about your precipitory events, your stressful times, and think if that did not change something in your health later on that you had to live with. Something is in my eye, so I'm continuously trying to ignore it, but finally I decide, well, heck with it. I'm going to rub my eye.
I have eye drops in here.
I feel better now. That's it. That was my precipitory event there. Much better now. But that's different from a trigger. A trigger is not something that comes and goes while the symptoms continue. A trigger is something that you have symptoms as long as you have the trigger event. It's something that you continuously are doing or feeling or exposed to or intoxicated by that leads to a chemical storm in your body producing inflammation, manufacturing cytokines, manufacturing interleukins and other molecules of inflammation, triggering a response of your immune cells. Now, once upon a time, we thought that the immune system was divided into two sections, and I often, in my lectures, still oversimplify it to make it easy for people to understand the innate immune system, the adaptive immune system, or the humoral versus the cellular immune system. And it used to be thought that one of those systems was responsible mostly for acute inflammation and the other for chronic inflammation. It turns out it's not exactly that way. There is a common pathway. There is a molecule called nuclear factor kappa B. And this molecule is the final common pathway of inflammation regardless of what you have. You could have neurodegenerative disease, or cancer, or autism, or psoriasis, or psychiatric conditions, or lung disorders, or urinary dysfunction, or digestive inflammation. All types of inflammation, whether acute or chronic, involve nuclear factor kappa B. That's the final common pathway. If you are exposed to AGEs, which is the most inflammatory molecule in your body, it would lead to the release and production of nuclear factor kappa B, because that's the final common pathway. And this is the symptom that you feel when you have autoimmune disease, whether it is psoriasis or rosacea or rheumatoid arthritis or other type of inflammatory arthritis, or scleroderma or lupus. It doesn't matter. All of those inflammatory conditions that we arbitrarily categorize as autoimmune diseases actually share commonalities with other forms of inflammatory diseases, which are all the degenerative diseases. Cancer is not an autoimmune disease, but it's an inflammatory disease, so it shares the same common pathway. It just isn't categorized as an autoimmune disease because it doesn't involve the same immune response. So we don't call it an autoimmune disease. We don't have a situation where your own immune cells recognize your own cells as foreign and start attacking them, like you have in diabetes type 1, attacking your own pancreas. You lose your beta cells in the islets of Langerhans and you cannot make insulin anymore. Now you have to inject it for the rest of your life. That's a result of your own cells recognizing your own tissue. Your own immune cells recognize your own tissue as being foreign and attack it. We have to ask ourselves, why is this happening? Because if you go to a rheumatologist today, or an endocrinologist, if the problem is in the thyroid, then most thyroid diseases are autoimmune diseases. And you have to ask yourself, why is it that the most common autoimmune diseases affect our glands, like our thyroid, our pancreas, and others? Why is it so common for glandular tissue to be affected, to be attacked by your own immune system? And that happens a lot more than other tissue. There's a reason for that. And that reason is also the clue to what we should consider for therapeutic purposes. Now, you want to be natural because you don't want to poison the body. How do you poison the body? By inhibited nuclear factor kappa B. What's the most potent inhibitor? A glucocorticoid called steroid. Why are steroids so effective? Because they inhibit that final common pathway that I just mentioned. What is it called? Nuclear factor kappa B. By inhibiting it, they stop the inflammation. And you feel better, but they also suppress the immune system and create many new problems with the kidneys, with water balance in the body, because they affect other aspects of this family called the glucocorticoid. And so you cannot stay on steroids for too long and be healthy. They wreak havoc with your body. Even short term, they change your body so much that you have no choice but to stay on them for a long, long time, to slowly, slowly taper them. Or else you'll have an immediate reaction again. You'll go straight back into the inflammatory response. So the treatment is not really addressing the problem. It only addresses the end result of it, the inflammation. And if you use COX inhibitors, if you use other types of anti-inflammatories, they either wouldn't be strong enough or they will cause other problems like cardiovascular disease, as in the case with some of the COX inhibitors, and some of the NSAIDs which cause damage in your gut, can cause, gastritis or ulceration. So you cannot be on those drugs for too long. Yet, despite that, the tendency of the rheumatologist or the immunologist that treat most people who come complaining of a chronic inflammatory disease, like an autoimmune disorder, are being told to just take steroids or some anti-inflammatories or some pain meds without even once asking the questions about the antecedents, right, the predisposing factors, your baseline of inflammation. Remember, if you have little lurking remnants of a big conflagration, but now you start blowing some oxygen upon it, it will blow up as fire again. You need to know what are the cinders doing. Are there any cinders in there? Are you always on the verge of inflammation that is severe? You have to know this. But the doctors are not asking you anything about your alcohol consumption, about drug use, and other things that could easily be partial causes of the predisposition. They like to immediately put you on some steroids or some anti-inflammatory drugs and be done. and then you have to either be on them for many years, as is the case with many autoimmune sufferers, or you have to keep suffering the symptoms of them, and then you have to taper down while you try something else, and then taper down and try something else again. And it's a game of drugs, and not a game of looking for causes. So first you have to identify underlying predisposition. Second, you have to identify the trigger and the precipitory event, because you can learn a lot from the patient's story about these things. Have you tried this and it made you feel better? Or did it not make you feel better? Those are the clues that we have to collect to find out what are the triggers. And then we have to learn something about the mediators and do some lab tests. The mediators of disease are the molecules that are continuously being produced by your own body as a result of this immune response, or as a result of this trigger for the inflammation. Once you identify those, then you can start doing a treatment that is more effective. So for example, what is probably one of the most common autoimmune diseases? Hashimoto's. What's even more common?
Lupus?
More common.
Arthritis.
Shingles?
MS.
IBS.
Diabetes.
Too many of them.
Celiac.
IBS.
Celiac disease, not IBS. Celiac is a very, very common autoimmune disease. And the trigger is very obvious. Right? You eat gluten. Yes. So that's a very simple way to understand the process of autoimmune disease. You have exposure to that molecule. After repeated exposure over years, you gradually start to recognize it as foreign. It's a proteinaceous molecule that binds with certain enzymes once absorbed into the circulation, and that triggers an inflammatory response. Initially you are just sensitive, but after the sensitivity is allowed to continue further and further down the line, the immune system starts seeing, wait a minute, there is another molecule like that in the thyroid. And now it starts attacking the thyroid as it would attack the gluten itself, or the gliadin portion of the gluten. So that's an oversimplification that leads to an autoimmunity. So when you said Hashimoto as a common autoimmune disease, the number one cause of Hashimoto's, or the number one cause of all thyroid autoimmune disease, is gluten sensitivity. So of course gluten sensitivity will be a much more common state, because it leads to many things besides thyroid dysfunction. Gluten sensitivity and celiac, even if it's undiagnosed through typical blood test, will be diagnosed if you do atypical test. If you look in your bowels, if you look in your stool, and you see that you respond by making a lot of antibodies against gluten, you know from a stool test what you will not find in a blood test. The stool is far more accurate because you make those antibodies in the gut, not in the blood. Only what leaks into the blood can be diagnosed. So only 10% of people who have celiac or gluten sensitivity are diagnosed through a simple blood test. 90% are being missed. That's unfortunate because people are suffering, and many people have autoimmunity and they don't even know it, but it might be the cause for some of their symptoms. Because it's genetically determined and environmentally where in your body the reaction will take place. And that's why some people would suffer in the brain, and some people in the lung, and some in the skin, some in the gut, some in the urinary tract, reproductive organ. It could be anywhere. And you won't know it. If you have chronic symptoms of any sort, it's very likely that you have autoimmune disease. And because most of us are inflamed, since we are all exposed to a diet that is far from optimal, there's a very high likelihood that most of us have at least low-grade autoimmune disease. Already, it's just unnamed. Now, there are hundreds of autoimmune diseases that are named, like Hashimoto's and Graves' and others. There are hundreds. But there are tens of thousands that are not named. And why is that? Because it's a spectrum. It's so variable that nobody would fit exactly into the box. We all have different manifestation of the immune system attacking in different locations simultaneously or separately in different intensities, and the rest is just giving it a name for the purpose of marking off a prescription and finishing an appointment with a diagnosis. That's the purpose of having names. But instead of giving it a name, we should say, you have some form of autoimmune disease and you have excessive inflammation as a result. And you probably already had too much inflammation to begin with, leading your system to become so excessively stimulated that you would quickly go into the autoimmune realm. Is that clear? So, first of all, with all autoimmune disease, the first thing that you must do is lower the hypervigilance. Calm down the overstimulation of the immune system by taking away the triggers, by taking away the foods that cause your system to be slightly more inflamed, by taking away the environmental pollutants, especially all those persistent pollutants that are organic compounds made by man, mostly, and are continuously in our homes and outside. So we need to purify the air. We need to change things in our immediate environment. How many of you are eating pesticides on a regular basis? I'm not asking you to raise your hand because I'm afraid of what I'll see. But even if you are very gung-ho on organic food, many times you don't, maybe you do a lip service to organic food, once a day. And the rest of the day you don't. So let's say you're a little more aware and you know the sweet 15 and the dirty dozen, the one that you should never eat unless they're organic. Do you all know the dirty dozen? Well, you must know what they are, and then you look them up on the internet. You must know what they are, because if you are going to compromise and put those pesticides in your body, which will trigger an inflammatory reaction, which would make you predisposed and hypervigilant, well, at least avoid those foods that are determined for you by the environmental protection groups to be excessively toxic and polluted, and you should never eat them unless they are organic. Those dirty dozen foods, like strawberries and apples, for example, should never be eaten unless they are organic. But some foods, like onions, eggplants, are okay, because they are not, or avocados, because they're not so heavily polluted, and or because you peel them off and the inside is okay. But some food you can peel off and they will still have tons of pesticides inside them. And that would create a problem. Any environmental toxin that accumulates in your body as a result of your vocation, let's say that you are an actor. I'm saying that because we are in Manhattan. So a lot of time actors put a lot of makeup on a regular basis. And they have to inhale all those paints, volatile organic compounds, which are known to cause immune response and inflammation. So all of those things have to be dramatically reduced so that your body is less inflamed to begin with, so that you don't continuously add oil to the fire. And you can tolerate better, and you're not causing as much destruction. Because the worst thing about autoimmune disease is if you allow it to proceed for too many years, you end up with so much destruction in the organ involved that repairing it becomes very difficult. if at all possible. Sometimes it's impossible because too much destruction has taken place. So you want to catch it early as much as possible and stop the destruction. First, improve the baseline. The second thing is do some diagnostic testing. Find out what is your trigger in terms of regular exposure as in food. Third, you have to look for another very potent component of the inflammatory response, and that's infectious agents. A lot of people develop autoimmune disease after being infected. So I had that concern. After having MRSA and Lyme at the same time, I had significant concern that I will start having an autoimmune disease. So far so good, but I'm aware that it could still happen. When do we have proof of what I just said? What is the ultimate proof of the fact that infectious agents are major contributors to autoimmune disease as a trigger? Vaccinations. A lot of children, young children and babies, develop their autoimmune diseases after they were vaccinated with live attenuated viruses that often have contamination of bacteria in them. And you don't always know about it until 10, 20 years later, incubation period, etc. But if a child immediately develops a major inflammatory storm that affects the brain, they can be easily categorized as autistic. And yes, it might be difficult to associate that change in their brain function to one chemical, as mercury or aluminum, even though they can all be contributors. But you can definitely connect it with the immunological storm that occurs whenever you get the vaccine. The immune system responds. In fact, the company that manufactured the vaccine wanted to respond. Or if it doesn't, they wouldn't be able to prove its functionality and get it sold to the public. They want to see severe elevation of antibodies. And then they can claim that it works. But they don't tell you about what the cellular immune response is doing. And autoimmune diseases involve deep component of the cellular immune system. That the antigen-presenting cells and the macrophages, natural killer cells, they all get involved in the process. Inflammation is crucial for health. We need inflammation to survive. Without the inflammatory response, we wouldn't be here. It helps us survive any type of adverse effect that would have killed us. So we need to be inflamed, but we need to also inhibit the inflammatory response as soon as the cause for it is gone. But if the cause stays with us, we end up with chronic inflammation. And that's a precipitating factor towards autoimmune disease, which is far more common than cancer and heart disease combined. So it's relevant. And by the way, the same inflammatory chronicity is associated with cardiovascular disease and cancer, as I said earlier. So they are interrelated. Inflammation could result in cancer even if it started as an autoimmune disease. Look at Crohn's disease. Everybody who has Crohn's or ulcerative colitis, these are known autoimmune diseases affecting the gut. They have extremely high risk of developing colorectal cancer because they've been so inflamed for so many years. So we have to test them using the M2PK test to see if they have colorectal cancer because they have a very high risk of it, and we can catch it early enough that we can reverse it. The M2PK test, it's a stool test that tells you with extremely high accuracy if you have colorectal cancer up to 30 years before colonoscopy would show it. So you don't have to wait until it's too late. You can easily find out just by pooping at home. So because of that connection to inflammation, you cannot just say, I'm not worried about one thing, I have the other. One could lead to the other. Now, you could talk to people about the vaccine causing that severe inflammatory storm that started the autoimmune disease in a child, but you might not give it that name. You might say this is autism, ignoring the fact that this is inflammation in the brain affecting its function. Maybe we cannot identify in every case an autoimmune phenomenon where the immune system is attacking. But ultimately, even with multiple sclerosis, we see somehow degradation of the myelin sheath surrounding the nerve cells. Do we know if it is specifically an autoimmune phenomenon? But we don't, but we still call it an autoimmune disease because it could be other things that have been shown. There are many factors involved. Vitamin D deficiency, specific microbes that have been found, and let us not forget the gut connection. The gut is the most important precipitating factor for autoimmune disease. We know that because we found that everybody with a leaky gut syndrome is predisposed to autoimmunity. And leaky gut syndrome is now basically an epidemic, but it's ignored as something out of alternative field, even though it's proven through a lot of scientific studies to be a real deal and it can be measured. There used to be a test called the lactulose mannitol test. It's been shown not to be very reliable, but it's been used for many years. Now we have a much easier test called zonulin. Zonulin, Z-O-N-U-L-I-N. Zonulin test is done through the stool again. You want to measure zonulin level in the stool because you want to measure what's happening in the gut. And if zonulin is high, it's an indication of frailty and discharge of the glue holding the cells together around the inside of the gut, such that there are leakages allowed to occur between those cells, and those leakages are resulting in undigested proteins or excessively complex peptides entering the circulation when they shouldn't have, had you enjoyed a healthy gut. A healthy gut should break down all the proteins you eat into single amino acids, and only those should be absorbed. Single amino acids don't cause a reaction, but peptides do. Peptides are amino acids that are interconnected, that have not been broken apart yet. The digestive system has to function. So you have to start from the top. Are you making enough acid in your stomach? Most people don't. Most people take antacid, drink milk, eat white bread, eat white flour, white sugar. Do all those things that destroy the stomach acid so they don't start breaking the protein. Then it goes down and they don't secrete enough pancreatic juices because their pancreas has been under attack for so many years by inflammation, because the pancreas is a glandular organ. And glandular organs manufacture complex proteins. Therefore, there's a high chance that the immune system will recognize portions of those proteins as familiar to the immune system and associated with something foreign that entered from your gut when you suffered from a leaky gut syndrome. You see the connection now?
Just repeat that last part again.
If you have a leaky gut syndrome, you allow all those complex proteins or those peptides to enter the circulation. The immune system, therefore, starts recognizing those complex proteins, and there's a high chance that it will cross-react or will also recognize the same components of proteins within your own glands, because they manufacture complex proteins. You see, complex proteins are supposed to exist in our body, but not in our gut, not in our absorption. not in our circulation, in our tissues. So when you manufacture complex protein inside your glandular organs, it's a different situation from absorbing complex proteins. That's why when you eat complex proteins, they are doomed to be broken down, no matter how complex they were. So it's kind of silly to say, oh, I'm eating protein. No, it will have to break down to amino acid. And most people do not break down the protein they eat to single amino acid by the time it gets to your cecal valve, which goes from the small intestine to the large intestine, the last place where you would be able to absorb it. They still have undigested peptides, and because of the leaky gut, they allow those peptides to enter. And that's why there is no autoimmune disease unless you have leaky gut. Or gut permeability is another way of saying it. Gut permeability can be measured easily. The same test that looks for the M2PK for the cancer can also look for zonulin at the same time. And then you know both. Plus, if you have other sources for inflammation in the gut, if you have histamine intolerance, for example, or if you have too much antibody production, or if you make too many natural antibiotic molecules, all of those indicate an inflammatory response is taking place, and that would result in leaky gut, ultimately. So you always have to look for gut health and correct the leaky gut if you want to attenuate your autoimmune disease. That's crucial. I would never treat MS without addressing the gut, without first taking care of the leaky gut, because that's at the root of the problem. As long as you keep reacting to those molecules that shouldn't have entered your blood, you will keep cross-reacting with those molecules in your tissues and attack your own tissues and end up with this severe destructive inflammation that's chronic. Is that clear?
Yes. Can I ask a couple questions?
Not yet. Later on will be questions. Even more than a couple. So that's one reason to deal with the gut. The elimination of the gut permeability that is underlying this chronic problem of autoimmunity and is completely ignored by the rheumatologist who simply want to give you more and more immune suppressive drugs to simply quiet the inflammation while allowing the cause for the inflammation to continue. That's why you have to keep fighting and fighting and fighting until the side effects kill you. Until the side effects are much worse than the autoimmune disease itself, and you can no longer take those drugs. And it's a shame because we have known these things for 50 years, but for some reason the rheumatologists, the people in charge of autoimmune diseases, are still back in the middle of the 20th century with their therapeutic approach. It's like they are so afraid of finding the causes, because as soon as you find causes, you can actually stop the treatment and they will be useless. You won't need them anymore. It's kind of scary. Why they don't read the science? Why they don't apply it? So the gut has one important thing which we discussed, the permeability, but there's another one, something called LPS, lipopolysaccharides. LPS, lipopolysaccharides, come from specific microbes in the gut. There are different types of microbes which I don't want to get into right now because it's beyond the scope of this discussion. But some specific microbes manufacture lipopolysaccharides in their cell membrane. And when they get broken down, they release some of those LPSs, lipopolysaccharides, into the gut lumen, and those get absorbed into the portal vein and end up in the liver. In the liver, there are immune cells that are antigen-presenting cells and macrophages. They're called the Kupffer cells. And those cells, when they receive the LPSs, they mount a major inflammatory response utilizing nuclear factor kappa B. The liver gets highly inflamed, and it's been shown that when the liver is severely inflamed, you also have Parkinson's disease, you also have other neurodegenerative diseases, and MS too. So here we have a very strong connection and a reason to treat the liver and to treat the gut so that the gut does not have the abnormal microbes that would create those LPSs. Now let's go on an extra step of severity, which makes the inflammation worse and the autoimmune disease more diagnosable and even given a name, a title. You can have the bacteria secrete just the LPS component, and that's enough to create a major inflammatory storm in the liver and damage. And the immune system in the whole body is coming to the rescue when the liver is calling for help. Because the liver is the most important organ of metabolism. But imagine what if bacteria get directly into the circulation. It's called bacteremia. Bacteremia is by itself a major cause of inflammation, as was in the case that I had with the MRSA and the Lyme's. Bacteremia often ends up with autoimmune disease, or major inflammation can be confused with it. A lot of people today, because of chronic abuse of antibiotics in the past, and because of chronic abuse of the immune system, making it unable to handle those microbes, a lot of people carry them in their blood for many years. And the inflammation gets worse and worse until it manifests as autoimmunity, because those microbes have their own complex proteins that are expressed in the blood and recognized as foreign by the immune system. It's just a matter of time before the immune system will recognize a part of our own cell as similar to a part of the cell of the microbe, cross-react them, and mount an attack on your tissues, creating an autoimmunity. So that's something that's been proven scientifically. So if you want to treat it, you have to sometime engage in a meaningful, natural antimicrobial treatment to suppress the microbes in a natural way, and there are various products that can do that, while also supporting the general balance of the immune system, because that's obviously been lost, or we wouldn't be there in the first place, right? We are there because we have damaged our immune system since our childhood, since our mothers forgot to breastfeed us. How many of you were breastfed? At least 9 months. Keep your hands up if you were breastfed for at least 9 months. So about 40% of you were breastfed, but how many of those, keep your hands up, the same 40%, how many of you were also introduced during the same 9 months to formula? Keep your hands up if you were also introduced to formula. Okay, so a few of you were introduced to other things that could trigger a problem, because if you're introduced too soon, it could be a problem. And
the older people were breastfed and didn't have formula.
Yeah, well, they have to be very old for that.
I'm old.
It's not true. It's not true.
That is old.
Well, I know some old people who didn't have any breastfeeding because the doctor told them first to cut out their appendix because it might one day rupture. So they had it taken out, and put them on formula because, you know, it prevents mastitis and discomfort. You know. So it depends on which practitioner they saw, I assume, at that time. But if you haven't had full-fledged breast milk for enough time without introduction of foreign proteins that are too complex, like soy protein, cow's milk, etc., you are at risk of having an insufficiently balanced immune system, because breast milk contains some important factors for the immune system, one of which is a very powerful prebiotic. Without that prebiotic, your microbes are not going to form healthy colonies, and others could start accumulating. Which then, if you have a major problem like major stress can cause hemorrhaging in your gut. Did you know that? In studies on mice, they put them under severe stress, and within less than a day, in some cases within hours, they had hemorrhages in their gut. And other things that I won't get into right now. But it just shows you how powerful stress can be. And if you already have insufficient immune system to begin with, now comes severe stress that happens to be more chronic, and you are going to have not just a leaky gut, but microhemorrhages that would allow interaction between the immune system and what's in the gut. That interaction could be very hazardous to your health in the long run. And what about the toxins that the bacteria secrete? Have you heard of bacterial endotoxemia? That's a condition resulting from having endotoxins secreted by the metabolism of your microbes into your circulation directly, causing a major inflammatory response. You see how often this could happen if your resistance is not strong enough, if your gut has not been supported, and if your immune system has not been given the tools it requires for the war at hand. Nowadays, we have no choice but to manufacture those prebiotics that were supposed to be made by a breast milk, made within the breast milk. And now, so many babies are not getting it enough, so we have to actually go to a laboratory and make those prebiotics so that children and adults can compensate for not having sufficient breastfeeding when they were children or babies. And yes, those products are available and can help people a lot if they already have established problem, and that could be easily elucidated through some laboratory tests, some stool tests. And through some urine tests, you can check and see what type of microbial endotoxins, including fungal toxins, are penetrating from your gut into your blood. Very important, because sometimes you cannot culture a microbe in your stool, but you can analyze the toxin itself that made it into the urine from the blood. And from its quantity, you can identify if you have Clostridium in your body, or if you have other types of microbes, or if you have one type of fungus or another type of fungus. That could be crucial because Clostridia are microbial entities, bugs or germs, that could kill people with a very tiny dose of their endotoxins. What's a good example? Campbell's soup, right? That got swollen because it had Clostridium perfringens within it. That's the name of that microbe from the family of Clostridia. What's another famous Clostridium? Clostridia tetani, that causes tetanus. So you see how potent those toxins are from Clostridia because they're anaerobes. And if they grow out of proportion in your gut, their toxins can be severe. Have you heard of Clostridium difficile? Why is it called difficile? Because it's very difficult to eradicate. Now, some doctors who are holistic will give you drugs, even though they're holistic, to remove those Clostridia, and I'm not in favor of that, because there are some natural products that are effective, but you need to support them with other things. The problem is, when you deal with functional medicine, let's just say the garden variety of it, the way it's being practiced by most of the doctors who dabble at it, they don't really get deep into it. As soon as they see something serious, they immediately go back to their old ways of giving you a drug. But they don't really support you while you avoid the drug. That takes a little more courage and persistence, and also education and mutual agreement with the patient as to the path we choose. If you choose for the patient immediately to take a drug, what do you expect the patient to do? You're not giving the patient any encouragement to explore improving their health. You only give them encouragement to quickly go for a drug solution. I said before, in nature we were supposed to suffer once in a while. Yes, we didn't like it, but we didn't have options, so we suffered. So what would happen if you have a toothache in nature? And yes, it could happen. What would happen? Would you run to the dentist? Do you see a zebra running to the dentist? No. They don't have that option. They just suffer. It just turns out that the suffering never lasts more than a few days, up to 7 days or 10 days, and that's it. Nature takes its course, and the tooth dies, and suddenly there's no more pain. And the tooth can still function, even if it's dead. Yes, it could break in 10 years, but it functions, and you no longer suffer. But would you wait those 7 or 10 days? Or would you run to the dentist as soon as you have the pain because we've been spoiled by never experiencing pain for a long amount of time? Because somebody will immediately give us something for the pain, or treat it in an aggressive way, and you will never have a chance to know whether your body would have had the opportunity to take care of it by itself. Like my body took care of the MRSA by itself. Thank goodness I was diagnosed too late for treatment, because I might have been afraid too, and I might have been, coerced into immediately doing some IV antibiotics in some hospital. Thank goodness I was functioning enough not to go to an ER. People told me, a lot of people in my life told me, go to the ER, and I refused. There's just one place I don't want to go. I said, as long as I'm not feeling on my deathbed, I'm not going to that place. And finally it took care of itself. Yes, it was uncomfortable, but it's okay. Sometimes. I think it builds character. And my character was totally, broken. It was a disaster. So now it's built up again, thanks to that pain. This is important. We need to stop dabbling with functional medicine. That's why I created something called, or I call it, natural functional medicine. It utilizes the same principle, but it departs from garden variety functional medicine in that we're not quickly resorting to solutions that are not jibing with what nature says, that contradict nature. For example, the diet. A lot of functional medicine doctors will tell you to eat a lot of complex protein. It's in vogue right now. It's a trend. It's a trendy thing. But they ignore the fact that you cannot break down those proteins in your digestive system, and you end up feeding the autoimmune disease and the inflammation because you're absorbing peptides instead of amino acids. The more complex your meal, the more proteinaceous it is, the more difficult it is for your stomach to start the breakage of those protein residues, and for the pancreas to do its job, and for your small intestine to finish it. So you won't finish the job. Yet that's what functional medicine doctors tell you today. Eat more protein. More complex, the better.
What counts complex?
Protein that comes from animal products is complex. Protein that comes from seeds is complex. So if you eat the same seed every day, like the same almond or the same soy or corn, seeds contain complex protein. It's the storage of the botanical the germination center. And you don't want to do what's unnatural by eating it every day. In nature, you wouldn't have access to the same seeds every day. Every plant goes to seed at a different time. And that's when you're exposed to those seeds. So a lot of doctors just ignore that and ignore nature, in fact. And that's why it's not natural functional medicine. With natural functional medicine, you modify everything you think about in terms of what nature would say. That's what I do during our foraging retreats in Wisconsin. We continuously experience nature and teach what nature is telling us in relationship to your health that you didn't think about on your own, because when was the last time you really experienced nature? Living in this concrete jungle, most of you just escaped to nature for 2 days in the Catskill or somewhere, coming back, but even there it's all groomed for you. It's all beautifully made and you have some forest, but most people just go there to veg out. They don't go there to really explore nature and understand her with all of its beauty and conflict. It's important. And that's the reason why autoimmune disease is so rampant today, because people are not exposed to the dirt. They're not touching animals and plants and fecal material and then putting their hand on their skin, and then the bacteria can make it into their mouth and into their gut, increasing the versatility. Most people in Western society have insufficient microbial versatility and they are susceptible. That's why some people with severe autoimmune disease are getting fecal implants, fecal transplants from other people who supposedly have better versatility. I'm hoping that once our medical center in Nepal is finished, if I find sufficient donors to finish it, that we could actually create an amazing place for medical tourism for people to come to have their fecal transplant from local, healthy, highly versatile, never treated by antibiotics children who just have to poop. They're not even slaves. They just have to do what they normally do. You cannot say that it's child abuse, they're pooping no matter what. This is fair trade business.
You're supporting the indigenous population.
And you support the indigenous population, to the core.
So what do you
So-
do for these conditions if you give a bacterial?
So for all of those conditions, if you have bacterial endotoxemia or bacteremia or LPS, lipopolysaccharide affecting the liver, or other types of infestation resulting from attenuated live viruses in vaccines, or other exposures like mercury and lead and arsenic and aluminum, which directly affect your antibody response, rendering your immune system more imbalanced, all of which are playing their role. And by the way, the vaccines contain all of those aluminum and mercury and so forth, in addition to geoengineering that also involves certain heavy metals that are found in higher amounts. I'm not talking about conspiracy theories, by the way. I'm talking about things that are proven. We know since 50, 60 years ago, we used to already do geoengineering, trying to alter the weather, using all kinds of metals designed to affect the behavior of particles in the air. And we end up exposed to all of these things. So we already have hypervigilance that we have a hard time controlling. So the treatment has to be to clean up, to detoxify, to sit in an infrared sauna and sweat the toxins out, to engage in really healthy, clean eating, avoiding the pesticide residues, eating foraged food whenever possible, eating food that have not been hybridized over the years, foods that are closer to their original state, like spices are. Spices don't really require too much changing. So how often do you actually get rosemary into your food? Or green onions or chives or parsley or cilantro. You need that in greater amount. The more you do the green leafies and so on, you're going to improve the immune response, because they replace the foods that would degrade your nutritional status. But you also need to have enough fat in your diet. Fat is crucial for brain development. And in that, I agree with some of those unnatural functional medicine doctors, because many of them want you to not just eat a lot of protein, they confuse the issues and they put the protein with the fat. So it ends up animal fat and protein together. That's a problem. You need fat, but it needs to be clean fat, not oxidized, not rancid fat. That increases inflammation. Whenever you eat oxidized fat, you increase inflammation. How do you know that they're oxidized? Because they were exposed to heat, oxygen, or light. And that's basically all vegetable oil. All vegetable fats that's been exposed to heat, light, or oxygen for a long enough time are going to be rancid. We don't have to look as far as trans fats. We already know about them. They also cause inflammation, free radical damage. Free radical damage leads to additional inflammation. It's a vicious cycle. Mitochondrial damage leads to inflammation, starting the response. Trauma can lead to inflammation too. So as soon as you're traumatized, as soon as you're inflamed, you need to do something. You need to force the inflammation to go down, not by taking a drug, but by lowering your nutrition intake. Too many calories also lead to free radical damage. That's why caloric restriction diet is very low inflammation and oftentimes helps people overcome significant disorders. I'm not talking about long-term fasting, which also has some negative impact associated with it. But 2 days or 1 day a week, if you are sick, could be very useful to your body. Or you can scatter the deprivation or the restriction of the calories throughout the whole week and lower your caloric intake. That's been proven to lower free radical damage. But there are also many natural agents that reduce inflammation by slightly inhibiting the activity of nuclear factor kappa B. Things like vitamin C, vitamin E, N-acetylcysteine, alpha-lipoic acid, or lipoate, silymarin, milk thistle, Silybum marinarum, milk thistle. It's available as a supplement. And many others, Boswellia, ginkgo has gangliosides in it, and there are many other curcuminoids that are doing the same, polyphenols. These are specific phytonutrients that can be obtained in concentrated fashion to quell the inflammation while you also eliminate the cause. Too many functional medicine practitioners will give you those products, but will fail to talk in depth about changing the diet. So you will continue to get the inflammatory agents into your body while trying to suppress it with an external agent, even if it's natural. So you end up continuously dependent on those products forever, which is really good for the practitioner who sells them to you. So it's better to change the diet and address the causes. If you are worried or suspicious of microbial exposure, toxic exposure from microbes, because of a precipitating event or a trigger that associates itself to microbes, then you need to take specific agents that are antimicrobial for long enough, maybe 2 months, for them to have an effect, because they are not as strong as antibiotics are. They're not as toxic. So instead of doing antibiotics for 7 days or 10 days, or 4 days in some cases, you can rely on those non-toxic natural agents that would do a similar job, maybe not as effective as antibiotics, but they will give your own immune system the chance to do its own job, reinforcing and strengthening you. But there are some exceptions. Some microbes, I wouldn't be able to take the responsibility for each individual and know that they're going to overcome it. There are some microbes that are too tough to just leave alone once you are affected. And that's when the risk is too high. That's when we sometimes have no choice but to take antibiotics. So we have to take that into account. But if you're dealing with chronic inflammatory condition, antibiotics are not going to do very well with you. Only for short term. 7 days, 10 days, you can do an antibiotic. But you must also do the probiotics, you must do other things to compensate. And if you don't take the antioxidants that I mentioned, you're not really helping the body take care of itself. It's a multi-pronged approach, dealing with the underlying issues, the mediators, the triggers, the antecedents, the precipitating events, identifying them and treating them, and then many people with autoimmune disease who were told they will suffer for life, who were told they'll be in a wheelchair in 5 years. You've heard those stories. They're told what is true to the statistics of the rheumatologist. Yes, they predict something that they cause. They tell you you'll be in a wheelchair because the treatment they provide will end up with you in a wheelchair. And they draw from that statistic that they have created. Can you see how ridiculous it is? It's not logical. Create a new set of statistics by treating people differently, but they don't want to learn. They want to continue business as usual. And people end up with autoimmune disease permanently until they get totally dysfunctional, invalid, and even die as a result of this condition that was never really treated as a cause, at the causation level.
So what is the antimicrobial, the natural?
So what is the natural antimicrobial? There are many, and it depends on what we find. Not all work the same for each person. But an example, would be mastic extract from the mastic tree. That's very powerful antimicrobial. Oregano, a carvacrol-rich oregano oil. That's another antimicrobial. Mastic, yeah. Also the
Mastic gum.
yeah, but it's not the chewing gum. Don't start chewing gum for autoimmune disease. Now, there are also the bioactive plant fraction molecules, limonene, terpinol-4-ol, nerolidol, cineol, etc. These are very powerful natural antimicrobials. They come from nature, and you're supposed to inhale them every second of your life. In nature, you would continuously making and actually ingesting or inhaling those antimicrobial agents, being protected all your life. But now we don't anymore. That's why you can actually obtain them and inhale them at night through a diffuser.
Essential oils?
Essential oils are what comes from the whole plant. When you compress it after preparation, after processing, and you get the whole oily component of the plant. That will have some inhibitory molecules that actually interrupt the activity of the active ones. And it also includes a lot of junk fats and junk oil that are not active, and some active molecules that actually do the job. The bioactive plant fraction products only have the active molecules, nothing else. So they are not essential oils. They are 100 times stronger.
How do you get them?
Ask Joy. You can get them by ordering them from Nutridyne. You can email Joy or Angie, and she'll let you know.
What's it called again?
bioactive plant fraction formulas.
I have 3 sets of them upstairs that I can sell.
I have 2 questions.
Okay, so let me just wrap out and then we'll open to questions because we need to wrap out. It's getting late. For some people, it's definitely been a long day for me, flying at 5 in the morning and seeing lots of patients today already. So the point here is to give you ideas. If I start giving you names of specific products, I'm not doing you justice because each person has different triggers, mediators, and antecedents. It's not appropriate. If you are doing all the right treatments for yourself, you'll have a much better chance of success. But if you just do a one-size-fits-all, you probably will be less successful. And if you are doing some things but forgetting others, like doing the products but not the dietary changes that are so crucial, not knowing what foods to eliminate, for example, or what form of the food to eliminate. Should it be only in its cooked form or in its raw form? Because sometimes cooked forms could cause reaction where raw wouldn't. It depends. So for each person it's different. So it's just an important thing to understand that this horrible statistic given to you by the rheumatologist, if you already have rheumatoid arthritis or other type of arthritis or other type of significant autoimmune disorder, you are doomed if you follow that approach because they put you on steroids or steroid creams if you have psoriasis, and that's it. But there are so many treatments for autoimmunity that are beneficial, like going in the sun. Just going in the sun and enjoying the sun on most of your skin is a major treatment protocol for autoimmune diseases. Just try it. If you're sick, go to the sun and you'll see. And it's not from vitamin D alone. It's from numerous photoproducts of the sun that are no less important than vitamin D, that can cause major changes for the better in your body, yet all the doctors tell you to stay out of the sun. And they give you drugs that are incompatible with the sun. So they tell you to stay out of the sun because the drugs are photosensitive. Instead of saying, the drugs are incompatible with the sun, so you have to stop the drugs and go to the sun. And in many cases, the sun will provide the exact benefits, proven, even better benefit than the drugs. But of course, you cannot patent the sun package. You can put it in little pills and sell for a lot of money. The sun is free. Nobody makes money here. Go in the sun. And it doesn't matter. No, I'm not going to chemtrails right now. So, no, well, you still get some sun exposure. You know, it's not going to be perfect if it's pollution, but it's better than not being in the sun. And indoor air pollution is worse anyways. So the more you can be outside, the better off. The more you inhale those molecules too. Or you can buy them, inhale them at night, but you still want to inhale the molecules of nature during the day whenever you have a chance. How often do you go to the parks? Not just Central Park, you know, real parks.
Why? What's wrong with Central?
It's just very small and it's surrounded by pollutants. I don't think that it's that clean inside, relative to real parks that are, you know, in the countryside in New Jersey. So the most important thing is to find out the triggers. Because if you don't eliminate them, they will keep triggering the response. And you will never be able to get rid of it. You'll be able to suppress it. You'll be able to have ups and downs. You'll be able to feel temporarily better and then, oh my goodness, I'm getting finally better, and then it comes back. It's because you never eliminated the triggers. So don't make the mistake of believing the doctors, even if they are functional medicine doctors, if they are not turning over every stone to see what's underneath. Until you find the trigger, it has a detective work connotation to it. You must do detection until you find the trigger. Sometimes you are lucky. It's gluten in the case of celiac, and you end up without celiac by just avoiding that trigger. But what if the triggers are complex? What if you have multiple triggers? How do you know which one? That's when testing comes handy. Or you can just stop eating altogether. And for a while you will feel better. But it's not going to end up with high quality of life at the end. So this is the concept of addressing autoimmune disease according to the natural functional medicine approach. And it's true for any inflammatory disorder, not just autoimmune diseases, including the skin. You know, and most people see me for skin. They come to me to remove their skin lesions, or to the doctor that I have trained to do that, to remove their skin cancers and their lesions from their tongue, and skin tags, and things on their scalp and in their nostrils, and their vaginal warts, or their whatever. They just want to remove everything, and that's what they come for. But then they also ask, what about this? And I see that they have acne, or rosacea, or psoriasis, or other types of dermatitis, or eczema, and so on. And these are systemic inflammatory conditions that are either autoimmune or other types of significant inflammation. Some of them can result in cancer of the skin, or they are precancers. Well, it's an opportunity to tell them, this is systemic. It is not a skin condition, even though it manifests on the skin. It comes from the inside, from the immune system, from toxins in the gut, from leaky gut, from high zonulin. And you need to treat those things to take care of this problem that is making you so upset because you don't want people to see that your skin is breaking out. And that's the one thing people care most about, their own skin, because it's the first thing to see. That is where it's so important to recognize that it is systemic. And you need to do different kind of work. This is not a lesion that can be removed like a mole, or a nevus, or a pre-melanoma dark dot somewhere where the sun does not shine. Yes, for those who don't know yet, the sun protects you from melanoma, proven by hundreds of scientific studies. Melanoma almost never occurs where the sun shines a lot, as in your face. Very rare to have melanoma on the face. 75% of all melanomas occur where there is no sun exposure at all. And the majority of melanomas in women occur between the pelvis and the knee, where there is no sun exposure, and below the feet. So why are you still buying into that silly lie that makes no sense whatsoever if you just look at where melanomas are? The number one cause for melanoma is small dark spots. It's called pigmented nevi. If you have enough of them, you have increased risk because all it takes is one converting. But if they're tiny, appearing out of nowhere, suddenly you have a tiny dark dot somewhere in a place where the sun is not commonly shining. Those are the most dangerous because they're ignored by the skin doctors usually. They only look for things that are big enough and dangerous looking when it's too late. They wait for them. In fact, they get lots of visits, doing nothing, every year. Lots and lots of office visits until finally it looks dangerous enough to do something bad to it, like biopsy or cutting into it, which can spread the cancer according to scientific studies. Every time you do a biopsy, you destroy the lesion and introduce the cell, you drag them through the tissue around the needle, that's proven, and those cells end up in the tissue or in the blood. And now you have metastasis, courtesy of the doctors. So you don't want to wait for that. When you have a tiny dot, that's when you want to remove it. And you can remove 100 of them easily and inexpensively in one time because it's so simple to do using a destructive method that does not lead to pain and dysfunction or suffering. So you can do a lot of them. and then nobody would ever have a melanoma again. So be aware that there are skin lesions. They come from some sort of inflammation in the skin, but that's different from the systemic inflammation that comes from the gut and the general immune response and hypervigilance. Those are very different. They should not be confused, even though they both appear on the skin. Is that clear? Okay. So, first of all, I want to thank you for being patient and waiting for me, being delayed with the traffic and all. Second, I'll take 5 questions. And third, if you want to be seen for the skin clinic, you have to talk to Joey, who manages the clinic and schedules people. And he's in the back raising his hands frequently, telling me that he's saying hi. And he's saying 5 minutes. And he says he has a blue page in his hand that he will give you. So you have a flyer with information about the skin clinic or about doing some stool test or other things. Or do you have salt there? Okay, why didn't you say so? Okay, also that he has, and you know, polysaccharides and sulfate polysaccharides are a very important component of building and modulating the immune response, which could reduce the autoimmunity and inflammation, and for that you need sulfur. And Joey in the back has the world's only sulfur-rich salt, which comes from the Himalaya. It's black, sulfur-rich salt. After you pulverize the black crystal, it becomes pinkish grayish, but it's totally different from the pink Himalayan salt. It has 0 sulfur. This is the only one with sulfur in it. That's the only salt I use. And as soon as you start using it, your nails start getting stronger, your hair gets stronger, everything gets better, because all of that requires sulfur, and your liver functions better in the sulfation pathway, which is the most important pathway of detoxification. So that salt is God's gift. It's basically medicinal salt, which I use instead of any other salt. That's my only salt to add to any food, because I don't want to miss an opportunity to get the sulfur and the other trace elements that are listed in there.
Keep it refrigerated or no?
No.
No.
It already lasted 300 million years in the Himalayas. What's another 100 years out of the fridge? Yes. So, question, yeah.
So my brother's got some infections in his teeth, and the doctor is saying that they pull his teeth and they do some implants, or with one they're suggesting a root canal. But he's trying to figure out a way of healing those infections naturally. He doesn't really know where to turn.
Well, that's a difficult thing, and it's an individual thing. Depends how far gone it is. If the tooth is completely dead, I haven't seen people able to restore a dead tooth. If it was just suffering, sick, inflamed, lying in bed, so to speak, you could still revive it and bring it back into productivity.
How?
Well, using all type of local and systemic agents, plus the diet and everything we mentioned, to lower the inflammation. But it depends. If his pain is gone, and now everything is rotting and he has an abscess, you know, he might need to pull it out.
Would he be able to consult with you?
Yeah, on the flyer for the skin, there's how people can consult with me by phone or Skype. Yes, okay.
Cholesterol sulfate deficiency caused by toxicity. Can you explain the mechanism and what it does to you?
Cholesterol deficiency?
Cholesterol sulfate.
Cholesterol is deficient whenever your liver is unable to manufacture it.
Very toxic reaction.
Every time your liver is burdened, either metabolically or toxicity or mitochondrial or periodical damage, all of those could result in the liver manufacturing a lot less of the cholesterol. That's all it's doing. Yes.
What do you think about coconut?
Coconut oil is a great oil to have. It's one of my favorite oils. I'm not limiting myself. I don't listen to the American Heart Association. They have failed American hearts for too many years for us to trust anything that comes out of their mouth. Their studies are simply, the recent study that they came up with was just a red herring. They've been saying the same thing for 30, 40, 50 years, and they don't want to come down from the tree. So they're using cholesterol as a surrogate when there's no proof that lowering cholesterol is by itself a solution for cardiovascular disease. But you can always lower cholesterol by poisoning the liver. And if something elevates cholesterol, I think it's a good thing. Some of my patients, I give cholesterol supplements because they have such low cholesterol, they are at severe risk for cancer. You don't want to have cholesterol below 140. So anything, there is a cholesterol supplement. It comes from plants, but it's cholesterol.
To lower or
To increase? Because lower, you don't want to lower it.
From 365, for
You
example?
don't want to lower it. You want to prevent it from becoming oxidized. You want to lower the ratio of small particle, dense particle within the LDL moiety. You don't want to lower cholesterol because that's tantamount to poisoning the liver. The liver makes a lot of cholesterol for a reason. You just don't want the type of cholesterol that would respond to inflammation. Remember, cholesterol has never been the cause for cardiovascular disease. That's a lie, designed to sell statins. Cholesterol has always been a protective agent we manufacture to create vitamin D, sex hormones, stress hormones, bile acids, and many other things. That's why you cannot be healthy when you don't have enough cholesterol and you have high risk for cancer if it's below 140. Everybody with cancer, advancing cancer, their cholesterol goes down. That's a bad sign. There's no reason to lower it. There's only reason to protect yourself from the inflammation, because that's the cause for cardiovascular disease. The inflammation that creates problems in the vessel wall, resulting in cholesterol coming to the rescue to smooth it up.
How do you do that? Cholesterol.
How do you do what?
To protect from inflammation.
Everything we talked about today.
Same thing.
That's inflammation. Remember we mentioned AGEs. AGEs come from the diet, from fructose, glucose elevated in the blood, from eating food. Certain foods like animal products are extremely rich in AGEs because the animals make AGEs like we do. When you eat the animal, you eat with all of its AGEs. So eating too much animal food results in too much AGEs. Highly potent inflammation. All of those things. Homocysteine, highly potent inflammatory agent. You don't want to be exposed to homocysteine that is elevated for too long, or it will cause depression, dementia, cardiovascular problem, and cancer, and other issues. So you have to lower that as a source of inflammation by eating differently. Certain foods are increasing homocysteine, especially protein-rich complex food. Or you can just take more of the B vitamins, especially methyl-rich B vitamins and choline and trimethylglycine. Then you'll get to lower your homocysteine level. And that will be another reduction in the inflammation at the lining of your blood vessel. And avoid any kind of concentrates, syrups with fructose. And if you have a problem and fatty liver, you should not eat that many fruits at the same time either. So you see, it's a complex situation that we got ourselves into, but we have to extricate ourselves from it. Yes?
Yeah, you mentioned about the functional doctors. So, as we know, the autoimmune is certainly on the rise and it's getting younger and younger.
Yes.
Now, why a lot of the proteins are put in is because the grains are, they trigger. Even the non-gluten grains have a different type of food.
Yeah, and that's why I tell people,
So what do
all
you do in
seeds.
these factors?
That's why I tell people all seeds, and I mentioned it today, all seeds that are containing the storage protein have to be rotated. If you are sensitive to something, avoid it completely. But if you're going to eat something like amaranth or teff, which are unhybridized and very few people have ever seen react to them, A lot of people react to quinoa because it's so popular, and they eat it every day.
What do you recommend? Let's say you take someone off of grains for a while. What would you recommend that they eat in lieu of the grains?
Well, they can eat some of the nuts and seeds that are not grains in that situation, but they have to rotate them once a week each type. So they never get to the point of excessiveness, of hypervigilance that is continuously...
Do you take them off meats and fishes? Or fish?
For the most part, if they want to reduce heavy-duty complex proteins, but it's not essential for them to be 100% vegan. If they had a piece of fish once a month, that won't affect their autoimmunity. If they have a piece of rabbit or a mollusk or a crustacean, that is not going to cause damage unless they develop an allergic response to it. So you have to analyze their situation. But they can eat legumes. Depends again. You know, you can sprout them and eat them, or you can sprout them and cook them.
Some
you can
of
steam
them
them.
reacted to legumes as well.
No, but it's
That's
usually
usually
some people react, but nobody reacts to everything. So that's why you have to do individualized work. Plus, I would turn that statement around. That's the difference between functional medicine and natural functional medicine. In functional medicine, you would say, this food doesn't agree with me, therefore it's bad. In natural functional medicine, you'd say, I don't agree with that food because I'm bad. Because I have damaged myself to the point where I cannot handle that food anymore. If we were 50 years ago or 100 years ago, if you look at Weston Price and his work, right? And he is one of the fathers of this new tradition, you know, like the Weston Price Foundation and the tradition of eating animal food and animal brain and the bone broth and all that. Even he was giving his patients wheat. Read his book, Nutrition and Physical Degeneration. I read it. He gives them wheat.
Well, that was the Einhorn week of many years ago.
Well, but the point is, 80 years ago, that's exactly the point. You're correct. 80 years ago, even 100 years ago, people were not so sensitive to almost anything that they ate. Now we are also sensitive because we have destroyed our health. So the problem is not the food necessarily. In many cases, the problem is us. And if we correct it, we can tolerate certain food that we couldn't tolerate earlier. I've seen people, if we go through the process patiently, instead of just bombarding them with supplements that will lower the inflammatory reaction but not to take care of the problem, if you go through the process, then they can start eating foods they couldn't eat before. But you need to do some testing and improve, and then suddenly the food agrees with you.
And what testing do you do? There's so many different testing and so many different...
There are tests for foods and there are tests that are looking for digestive function.
Do you test IgG, IgE, IgA, IgM?
Depends, yes. It depends on the situation. I only work with reputable labs, but...
Cyrex labs you work with?
They're okay, Cyrex. But the important thing is the specificity and the sensitivity of the test based on the importance of the inflammatory agent. There are things I would not really want to test, like peanuts. To test peanuts is to give people an excuse to eat peanuts. Because if it comes negative, they say, oh, I can eat peanuts. But peanuts today are dangerous because of the way they're stored, the way they're prepared, because of the fatty, oily content. It's all rancid, all the mold that grows on them, the types of fungus that create all those horrible toxins, that people are not recognizing why they're having all those sicknesses and headaches and other inflammatory responses. So why test for peanuts? Just avoid them and don't test.
Couldn't you say that for all grains?
No.
Why not?
Because when I take people foraging, we sometimes find wild amaranth and we eat it.
Peanuts are not a grain anyway.
No, peanuts is not a grain. Peanuts is a legume. But
that's not
amaranth
very
is
palatable.
amaranth is a pseudo grain.
Very convenient, and, you know, the convenient factor has to be weighed into the whole thing.
Right, so when you come foraging, I cover paleoanthropology and human nutrition and the chase for calories, and then we start understanding that we have two choices. One is to go back a few thousand years into the jungle, where we can graze all day long, or we are living in a modern society where we have a 9-to-5 job and we have to have our 3 square meals, where we get all the calories in a short time. Or you can try to graze all day long. You can try to graze all day long even in a modern society, but most people, unfortunately, if they live in the urban jungle, it's not so easy to get fresh grazables. And you know, and people, not everybody is, you know, so strong-minded to make that type of a change. So maybe, I mean, maybe there are a few people like you that are strong-minded, but I find that if we look at the caloric craving that people have, and that is something that requires more in-depth explanation than the topic of this lecture, we see that once people have been accustomed to having a large amount of calories in a very short time, in a quick meal of 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, they get enough calories to last them for 4 hours or 5 hours. It's a very strong addiction to break away from. I agree that it would be ideal, but I don't know how to convince people who live in, who have a very structured life in modern society that is far away from nature. In nature, you wouldn't have a choice. You'd be forced to graze. And you wouldn't have other options, so you wouldn't even complain about it. You wouldn't have a supermarket that is so conveniently right in front of you. I mean, look at what's happening with chocolate, how everybody is saying glory, glory, hallelujah to chocolate, how important it is to health. And doctors are recommending, you know, it was never in nature a part of our diet. It's a stimulant, it's addictive. So it's not easy. If it's in front of you, you're gonna want it because human nature is to bypass to go straight into the reward cascade and bypass suffering or run away from suffering by eating certain things, including calories. So I can tell people to eat lots and lots of fruit to get calories, but today the fruit are so hybridized they're totally unnatural.
Exactly.
And they are full with fructose that some people with fatty liver cannot tolerate, and they get in trouble and they have fructose intolerance. So yes, some people can handle them, but many can't. And the sick people and many holistic people have become holistic because they got tired of a sickness that nobody could help them with. And those people, among them you see a lot more of these type of conditions like histamine intolerance, fructose intolerance, because they are self-selected into being in the holistic movement. So these are the people we know, and that's why places like some of those retreat centers are not offering any fruit for a while. I don't think it's necessarily wise. I think people should have some fruit, but you need to know which type, and you need to know what you can tolerate until you fix your fatty liver and handle the fructose more effectively, or else you'll have a lot of inflammation, because fructose causes 10 times more inflammation than glucose when it comes to advanced glycosylated end product. And that includes fruit. I've seen a lot of people who tried the 80-10-10 on a diabetic diet. People who are diabetic and try that, every time they eat a fruit, immediately the glucose goes up. And they don't even measure the fructose. If they did, it would even be worse, because fructose takes time to convert. So it depends on how fast the liver works. If you have a good liver, you'll be in worse shape. If you have a poor liver, a bad liver, it will convert glucose to fructose much slower. You will have less inflammation. It's a dichotomy. It's a conflict. But it means that we cannot just make a blanket statement. People need calories nowadays, or they will simply drop everything and eat junk. I need to figure out a way to help them. And I've seen people who tried that, people who went on a less than 10% of their calories coming from fat. I've seen it. They all binge at night, every few weeks, and they feel so guilty. And then they go back to the priest on some cruise ship, and they're told again. And they eat a lot of junk on that ship, by the way. All those soy products, all those, mock meats of this. They eat all that, and then they are told not to have fat. And they crave it because they need the calories, and their brain craves it, and their cholesterol starts going down. And their liver is fatty. And those people then go on a fast. 10 days, 20 days, and the liver gets even fattier. Look at the textbook of physiology in Guyton. It says this is one of the causes for fatty liver. Long-term fast. It's not done in nature. So the natural hygiene movement has the important message. And I used to be a member of that group loosely. I never really followed any group. I just investigate. But I have a lot of friends in the natural hygiene movement because we have a lot more commonalities than disagreement. But there are certain things that are simple quotation, going down from decade to decade without analysis of what they mean. And that becomes more like a dogma. When you start quoting things and assuming things, just because somebody said it 100 years ago in Europe. And as a result, a lot of people suffer from low cholesterol, from early onset dementia, from Parkinson and Alzheimer's, because they're not having enough fat, or because they think that they can get all their caloric intake just by eating lots of juicy, huge, sweet fruit. Many of them get sick. Many of them, not all, because some have good start. They didn't get vaccinated as children. They had good upbringing. Their parents were crazy enough to make them eat organic and breastfeed them for 2 years. Those kind of crazy parents have the healthiest children. And they can handle anything, but they assume that others are like them, and they aren't. So some grains can be beneficial in giving you those nutrients and those calories, as long as you rotate them, and as long as you're not sensitive
and
to
for
them.
picky eating children, you think you can rotate grains because not these kids.
For millennia, children all over the world have eaten grains and they were okay. But I agree that...
Not the picky ones now. I mean, it's hard enough to get them to eat vegetables or eat...
Right, but grains are obviously a lot more addictive because they are richer in calories and because they have within them the proteinaceous components that could lead to a stress reaction. And every time you eat protein that's complex and you don't break it down completely, you end up with some of the peptides dwindling to dipeptides, which act as direct neurotransmitters. So you get totally hooked.
Dopamine.
Yeah, you end up completely hooked on them. And that will be true for any complex protein, including grains. So I understand their arguments. I read all this stuff about grains. But in real life, there are some compromises that we have to make so that we have quality for a long amount of time without feeling guilty and binging and going from extreme to extreme. And that's perhaps one of them. Occasionally, what if you sprout grains, alfalfa or seeds, if you sprout them, I have not seen too many people who suffered. Even in my restaurant in Minneapolis, that I closed just last year, after 15 years, we had tens of thousands of people frequenting it. And people didn't have a problem even with it was a gluten-free restaurant, but there was some quinoa or some buckwheat or other things that you might say are not grains, but it was buckwheat. It was sprouted buckwheat in the crackers and in the pizza crust. People didn't seem to have any problem. They felt great leaving the restaurant. They felt absolutely excited. Why should I limit people because of dogmatic ideology? I will limit you based on your situation. But I'm not going to limit everybody because then what are we going to be left to eat? Who's going to do it? People are just going to throw away the baby with the bathwater and there will be no improvement.
regarding autoimmune disease, if you get the gut healthy and working right again, with something like Parkinson's or MS, can that actually be healed?
I have seen so many patients with MS who no longer have the diagnosis.
If
You
they go
cannot
back
even
to,
see it.
if they like start eating crappy stuff, will they get their symptoms back again very quickly?
In theory, because they already have the susceptibility. It's again the same, it's a trigger that they have, and as long as they avoid the trigger, they avoid the condition.
Now, what about something like Parkinson's?
Parkinson depends on when it's diagnosed. If you catch it really early, you have a much better chance. But if you catch it when, remember, Parkinson is diagnosed when 85% of the cells in the substantia nigra are no longer manufacturing dopamine. That's fairly advanced before you have the first symptom. That's a problem if you have to wait that long. That's why I'm in favor of catching things much earlier. And then you don't end up that far gone. But in theory, if you find the triggers or the antecedents and eliminate them, you can have some reversal to some extent. Yes?
My PSA just went up from 3.1 to 5.3 in 6 months.
Then you have about 80 to 90% chance of already having prostate cancer without even being told.
Why?
Because anytime it goes above 4, there is a very high likelihood of it already having cancer. But they cannot identify it yet because it's microscopic.
Well, I just found out like 2 days ago.
Okay? Well, no reason to fear, just reason to act. To act and to reverse it so that it won't develop into a full-fledged cancer. Cancer of the prostate is fairly easy to eliminate.
Well, what would be contributing factors to that?
Oh, so many things. Let me count the way. The prostate, another gland. So many things can go wrong with a gland. It's susceptible to electromagnetic exposure, among other things. Susceptible to jiggled AC current that goes through your body to the floor when you work on your computer or touching other electronics. And dairy products, animal products, deficiency in vitamin D, and sun exposure. There have been amazing studies about how sun exposure reduces prostate cancer by at least 50%.
Yeah, my vitamin D is 59.
Yeah, but sun exposure is not equivalent to vitamin D.
Yeah.
Vitamin D is a surrogate of sun exposure. Sun exposure has many other reasons why it eliminates problems beyond the vitamin D. You can have high vitamin D, but still have prostate cancer. And sun exposure will give you vitamin D, many other things in addition to that. Vitamin D is most useful when you are deficient. But if you are not deficient, it is less provable to be deficient, making significant effects. Since most people are deficient, living in the north, living in the city, most people need to take supplements, but that increases the level in your blood. It does not increase all the other photoproducts of the sun, therefore you're missing something. That's why vitamin D is really good to take as a supplement when you are deficient, to bring yourself to sufficiency. So you don't have... Well, that's a whole other discussion. It's subject to disagreement between researchers and, I have a 2-hour discussion, just, it's not worth getting into right now. Let's just say the word is still out. So it's okay if somebody gets to 60 or 70 or 50 to 80, all good. But it is not a substitute for solar rays, for sun exposure. Nothing can replace the sun. It's been here. It's been here a few billion years before we came here. How could we determine that the sun is not good for us? Maybe we're not good for the sun, but the sun is good for us.
So how would I get a diagnosis? How would I know for sure?
Let's do a consultation.
Well, I'm seeing you tomorrow. I'm seeing you tomorrow.
No. Consultation by phone.
He's seeing you tomorrow.
He's seeing me tomorrow for skin.
Yeah.
What you're asking me is systemic.
Yeah.
Is not skin lesion related.
Yeah.
So I'll see you tomorrow. I'll be very happy to help you. But this requires more in-depth discussion because it will include various novel ways to treat prostate cancer very effectively without removal of the organ or surgery, and definitely don't do a biopsy if your life is important to you. Because that's the most important thing, to avoid the biopsy. I hope you didn't do it yet.
No, I mean, I don't plan on doing it.
Don't ever do a biopsy on a prostate because they will put the needles at least 20 or 30 times in there because they don't know where it might be. So they have to take lots and lots of cord because it's a hit or miss game. And if they hit on something, warn you. But if they miss, also warn you because you didn't get the right diagnosis. So either way, it's a bad approach to do the biopsy.
What about oncoblock?
That's a reasonable approach. That's a good approach. Yeah. Right now, temporarily, they are not doing tests because they're going through ownership change, and it's been long, and I don't know why they're taking so long. But I suspect that before the end of the year, Oncoblock will be available again for that. But if you already have more than 4, and we offer it at a discount, we are the last entity in the US to still offer the Oncoblock. We just had our last test done a week and a half ago. But now even we run out of kits until they start again. But if you have PSA above 4, thanks to Oncoblock, we already know, in hindsight, that people with PSA above 4 already have a very high likelihood of cancer brewing microscopically inside the organ. So it's a good idea to start treating it even if you didn't do the Oncoblock. Yes.
I have a cousin who is not open here.
If he's not open, then
Probably.
let him do what he wants.
What if, how do you know this? He had his pancreas.
Okay, but how is it relevant to everybody?
I want to know, is there anything that someone will do, where if I could say, call...
Depends for, there's always something to do. In functional medicine, there's no such thing as nothing to do. There's always some triggers, mediators, antecedents to approach to improve health.
So I could...
Of course.
I'd like to get your opinion on colostrum.
Colostrum, sometimes it can help people for a while. Sometimes not. Again, no one size fits all. Not everybody needs it. Just because it's available doesn't mean that all of us should be taking 500 products each. Just because they're there. That's where individuality is important. Yeah, we really have to wrap up, so go ahead.
What would you suggest to boost metabolism?
Metabolism is a very broad term. Boost metabolism for most people means stimulant, coffee, chocolate. Of course, that's bad in the long run because you need to boost metabolism. You need to define it first. What is it you're trying to boost?
Lose abdominal fat.
Okay, so if you want to lose some excess fat in the wrong places, then it's a combination of things. Change the microbiome, reduce inflammation, lower inflammatory cytokines in the body, reduce the fat-soluble toxins that hold within the fat, reducing fatty liver. There are many things, depending on your situation. Have you been taking this whole thing?
Yeah.
Until this moment?
Yep.
So I want to wrap things up because really we are beyond our time. I hope you got something useful out of this, and I appreciate your being here and your attempt to have a conversation about health. I think that it has to be a conversation. I don't want to be a guru or just to, force my opinion. I'm just trying to answer some of the questions and explain what nature would have done. And since we don't live in nature anymore, how we compensate for our departure from nature so that we can be not perfect but closer to perfection than being totally the opposite of nature.
Thank you.